Okay, today we're going to talk about different careers in construction and architecture that you could have, and specifically ones that relate to education that you could get it. So if I'm in construction, in the construction industry, I can be in the design end, being an architect or designer. I can be in the construction end, the actual person who does the work on the buildings or structures. I can be an engineering or technical end, the person who supports with the engineering or the technical aspects of the building. You could be a small contractor, or you could be in a building trade. There's actually more than this. What does an architect do? If you ask an architect the details of their daily job, you'll probably get a different answer every time you ask and every architect that you ask, because it changes on a daily basis depending on what their current project is, where they live, big city, small town, who they work for, a number of other projects. There are architects who specifically specialize in certain areas. Like I have a friend who's an architect and she does hospital operating rooms. Very, very specific, and you have to really know every aspect of what you're doing. Other people might do schools. Some people might do residential. It used to be that architects would do a broad spectrum of things, and you'll see that more in small towns, or if you have a smaller architecture firm of just maybe 1 to 6 people, they might have a wider range of stuff they do, but it tends to be that the big firms don't do residential and the small firms aren't doing big hospitals for obvious reasons. So there's a lot of different ways that you can practice in architecture depending on what interests you. So what jobs do you think you could get with an architecture degree? Any ideas from anybody? Well, here's some of the careers you could have in architecture. You could be an architect in the firm. You could be a landscape architect that's designing the plantings and the outside built environment. You could be an urban planner. You could be a restoration architect, a research architect, a lighting designer. Those are just some of the few. So here's an architecture firm. So architecture is the art or practice of designing and constructing buildings. So in an architecture firm, they tend to be open office areas like this. You'll see that people are working on computers. They have computers, ideally 2 screens, because then you can run different programs at the same time. And it's a very open, collaborative environment. And if it's a larger firm, they may group people in this particular area together if they're working on their own project, a specific project, so that you can collaborate and walk amongst each other. You'll see that they're still using traditional drawings, but they're doing all of the drawing on the computer, usually these days in. You could be a landscape architect. You design and plan the outdoor spaces. So you're designing all the plantings and all of the outdoor furniture and outdoor areas around the housing. You could also go to school and become a landscape architect, so it can work both ways. You can be an urban planner. Urban planners develop short and long-term plans for growth and revitalization of urban, suburban, and rural communities. They work with local officials to make decisions about social, economic, and environmental problems. University of Illinois in Chicago has the largest urban planning school in the country, and a lot of people go through there. And within urban planning, there's many different focuses that you can take, or that you can decide what you want to do, whether you want to do the social aspect or the transportation or the planning. My daughter did her master's in urban planning at the University of Illinois in Chicago, and she now runs the planning for the new water mains for the city of Chicago. She works for an engineering firm that has a contract with the city, and she plans out the new water mains. It doesn't sound like something that would require planning, but it does, because she said you have to look at the whole schedule of what other projects are happening at that time, what things are in the way. We use a program called GIS, where mature trees are, and they have to plan the whole process that works both with the construction and with whatever's happening in the space at the time. And of course, some people try to get this political. She stays out of the political fray because aldermen are always trying to get things done for their community, especially when re-election time comes up. So she said this is something she never thought she would do, but she, finds it interesting. So the planning can occur on many different levels. It's more broader planning as opposed to doing just one building. You could become a restoration architect. You could conserve and restore existing historical buildings. So what building is this, guys? Falling water. This one. Older, right? Pantheon and Rome. So these are both historic buildings, and there's a difference between conservation and restoration. So this building is conserved. We're trying to keep it from deteriorating any further. They're not restoring the building back to what it looked like. Obviously a lot of the walls are missing, the roof is missing, a lot of pieces are missing up here. And my understanding is these were painted really bright colors too. It wasn't just a white marble building. So in the case, they're trying to stop any further decay and just conserve the building where it's at. Unlike Falling Water, when they work on this, they do restoration. The building was completely intact, had not hit major levels of decay when it was pulled into this not-for-profit. So they work on restoration of restoring the building back, and they usually pick a target year. This is one thing that you could do as a restoration architect. You could also be a research architect, focusing on tools, how digital tools enhance the work of designing buildings. So the tool that's shown here is a screenshot of Revit, and we teach 2 Revit classes here at Triton. Revit has been around about 15 plus years, and was bought up by Autodesk, who owns AutoCAD. And they have improved this dramatically. Years ago, I took 3 courses that we had in Revit, and it's very interesting. So it's a 3D modeling program where you don't just draw a floor plan and then draw elevations. You're designing the building, you're drawing the whole building at one point. So when you draw the floor plan, you tell it how high the walls are, what the materials are, and it instantly develops a 3D model of it. So you can go back and forth between the 3D and 2D model. And some of the cool things are, like if I've got this window here and I decide I want to move it over here, I can move it on the elevation and it will update the floor plan, because we didn't draw just a floor plan. It's generating a floor plan. We are drawing a 3-dimensional model. Same thing if I move something on the floor plan, it will change it on the 3D model. So it's very interactive. So it's a takes pretty powerful computer to run it also. And so with great power comes great responsibility, because you can also do some serious damage if you don't know what you're doing in this. So if you don't understand a lot about the construction process and about how buildings go together, and you don't have a good handle on Revit, you could do some serious problems. When I took my class, we had one collaborative class where we worked in groups on a building. It was supposed to simulate an office. And we actually had to lock one of the people in our group out of our drawings because they would go in when no one was there and they were moving things around, moving columns around on an existing building. So people can do a lot of danger. But this is where all the firms are heading towards. And the interesting is you then give your 3-dimensional model to the engineers. They're also using Revit, and it's all done collaboratively. So you can generate reports on how well it's performing from an energy standpoint. When they do the structural analysis, they'll know where everything goes. And then when plumbing and electrical go to put their stuff in, it'll run interference checks. And so even before you've started even digging one hole in the ground, they already know where there's going to be problems, where maybe the electrical engineer put something that doesn't work with the structural engineer. So it's a very powerful tool. And a lot of our students, we have people come back who are in the industry just to learn Revit, and a lot of our students say that the classes in Revit here help them to get that first job because not many schools teach Revit in particular. You could also be a lighting designer. So lighting designers have to understand about lighting levels, different colors of light, different types of fixtures and bulbs that you would use, and how it affects the experience, your health, and your well-being. Sometimes there's code requirements for how much lighting you have to have on a desktop in a particular situation. So a lighting designer understands what's happening in the industry and what's the current technology. This is actually a showroom that when the pandemic takes over, I would encourage everyone to go visit. This is Lightology. It's on the Chicago Avenue and Wells, I think it is. And they have 3 stories of lighting, and it's changing all the time. So they not only have the cool, trendiest lights that you have here, they also, everybody who works there understands, you know, the type of fixture that it is and what the bulb is and what the output is and how to work best for your space, and how they'll help you to space out the, like if you have can lights in the space, how many can lights do I have? If we were in the studio, go back. If we were in the studio, you know, we'd look at the light fixtures in the ceiling and understand why the spacing is such that we get an even light level across the whole space, because you want to avoid light in dark areas. Our next thing, so these are other jobs you could get with an architecture degree. You could be an artist. I know several people who have degrees in architecture and are artists. You could be an industrial designer. Maybe you're designing teapots, or you're designing things that people use in their house, or things that are used on a daily basis. You could be a furniture designer. One of my daughter's friends, her and her husband went to architecture school, and he's a furniture designer and furniture maker. A textile designer, a graphic designer, a video game designer, a photographer. There are actually photographers who are just architecture photographers, or you could be a production designer for like a stage set. So the architecture degree is pretty varied in where you can take it when you're done. Unlike some degrees, they have more of a linear path. So things that you can do outside of design, you could be a teacher like me. You could be a philanthropist if you have a lot of money. We'd love to get more architects into politics so that they understand the built environment. You could be a conservationist, writer. There are people who write books on architecture in all different subjects, but there's also newspapers that have architecture writers or architecture critiques full-time. Chicago has a man named Blair Kamen, and it would be worth your looking up some of his writings. So he'll write about the different architecture that's happening in the city at any point in time. And you could be an entrepreneur. You can do that with any degree, actually. So what is architectural education? This is where it gets confusing. So here's a typical architecture studio, and you'll see there's lots of desks and an open workspace and tons of models. So in architecture, we build tons of models. So there are several ways you can get an architectural education. You can get an associate's degree in 2 years, which is what Triton offers. You can then move on to a bachelor's of arts in architectural studies for 4 years, which is University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and I think University of Iowa are examples of that. I have a Bachelor of Science in Architecture from the University of Michigan. So those are 4-year degrees. You cannot get licensed with those degrees. Those require that you get a master's degree. You can also get a Bachelor of Architecture that's a 5-year degree, and that's what the IIT, the Illinois Institute of Technology, is a 5-year degree. With that, you can get licensed in the state of Illinois. Each state has slightly different requirements. And then you can get a Master's of Architecture. There's actually 1, 2, and 3-year master programs. So a 1-year master would be if you had a 5-year degree. A 2-year master's would be if you had a 4-year degree in architecture. And a 3-year master's is for the people who have a non-architecture undergrad. It's very confusing. There's no, and this is, I can't think of any other profession where the education options are so widely dispersed out. But a lot of our students will transfer either into a 4-year college or IIT, a 5-year college. And then if you want to also teach, you need to get that master's degree regardless of where you got that. So that's the very confusing part of it. So with an associate's degree in architecture, a lot of our students go to work for small contractors. I get emails periodically, someone especially looking for Revit skills. They can work for an architectural engineering firm. They could be a draftsman with a small contractor. You could be a detailer for a manufacturer, which is doing shop drawings. I think we touched on shop drawings, but if I spec a specific boiler and I want it, and the contractor is going to supply me with that boiler, he sends me back a shop drawing for approval. So they're all in agreement with what we're looking for. Somebody has to draw those shop drawings. Somebody has to draw the details. When we looked at windows, somebody has to draw the windows for the manufacturer. So you can become a detailer for a manufacturer. You can also work for an architecture firm. You're not going to move up real far with just a two-year degree. It used to be that very few people had degrees, and it was a lot of on-the-job training. That's kind of gone by the wayside. Another thing that you can do is you can be a plan reviewer or building inspector for a municipal building department. Most plan reviews are now sent out to companies that do this for each village, and there's very few that do them in-house anymore. They all have their building inspectors on staff. So that means you're the person to go out and make sure that the drawings match what's being built on the site and that they're following all the codes. You can also become a manufacturer's rep. I've had students do this after a two-year degree. You could work for Pella Windows, and you could go to different architecture firms and engineering firms and sell their product. You could work for a tile company. People like this who like to get out and meet lots of different people and have a varied routine. So you become the representative for a particular material or product. And there's lots of opportunities for that one. So with an associate's degree, you can transfer to a university program in architecture. It must be an accredited program with the National Architecture Accrediting Board. And the goal would be to have a professional degree to become a licensed architect. If you transfer to any school, please make sure you transfer to an accredited school. I've had students that went to for-profit private schools, and if they're not accredited, it's not worth anything. You just want to make sure that whatever you do, you make sure wherever you're applying, ask if they're accredited. So professional degrees in architecture, we touched on this a little bit. You can have a Bachelor of Architecture is a 5-year degree. IIT offers that, and Iowa State University offers that. So the professional degrees mean that you can get licensed. And the Master of Architecture is a 2-year degree if you have a BA in architecture, or a 3-year degree with any other discipline. It literally can be any other discipline. This is jumping at me. In Illinois, you have to have a professional degree in architecture. You have to do this intern development program, working for a licensed architect, and then pass a registration exam that's 7 parts. It's pretty grueling, much more grueling than most professions. So now we go into construction. So the architect designs, they tell you what they want, and the construction builds it or realizes the design. They figure out how to do it and the means and methods to get this done. So anybody know what building this is? You guys should all know this building.
Is that the Pritzker Pavilion or the?
Yes, it's in Millennium Park. It's where all the free concerts were. You can still go down there. It's a great lawn. So this was Fred Gary's big, beautiful design, right? Big, bold design. He had this elaborate building. These are all titanium panels that are curved, curly, and you know, this trellis going over. So he had this concept of the design. He had it all drawn on paper, and he had it all laid out. Somebody had to figure out how to build it. And so construction can get pretty interesting depending on the project you're working on. So they had to figure out how to build this and how to put it together to make sure it ended up looking like his drawings. His drawings had to be complete and had to be accurate, but it takes, you know, you don't understand that there's these curly covers, but there's actually another building behind that. Those are kind of like little furtive flourishes. One interesting thing about Frank Gehry is he's one of the first to use that three-dimensional modeling program because you couldn't draw this building in AutoCAD or by hand, right? You would have a hard time explaining to people what you wanted to do. So he used software that was used to design jet planes, and he reconfigured it so he could design his buildings with that. So he was one of the first doing this three-dimensional modeling software in the building industry. And now it's become more standard. I think you've seen the buildings are, if you look at buildings the last 20 years, they've gotten much more fanciful, is probably a good word to say, because they can do more things modeling it 3D than they can drawing it in 2D. If you're in construction, you can become a site superintendent, a project manager, a construction manager. You can be an estimator. I think we've talked about this. There's, somebody who would just do the estimation for the building, or you can be a construction document specialist. That would be for a really big firm. These are some of the biggest firms in the city of Chicago. It's kind of interesting. I had to run the numbers for architecture and construction and for a review of our programs of job prospects. And architecture is not negative, but it's really low. It's about a 1% growth right now. It will turn around once the pandemic changes, but construction is really big. My husband's in construction and they're busy because if there's not as much new building being started, but what is there is being renovated. So there's a lot of renovation going on. So construction is up right now. So you can start as a site superintendent. Site meaning you stay at the site, you work with all the trades, you coordinate the subcontractors, you worry about safety, so you're going to have that OSHA training, and you're going to be there, the contact person on a day-to-day basis, and you'll work with the people on there, plus you'll work with the people above you to make sure that the project is progressing as needed. You can also be a project manager, and this person oversees all the aspects of the building project. So this is called a Gantt chart. And if you take construction planning and scheduling next semester, which I highly recommend, if anybody's in Pat Fury's class, he's planning to teach this. And so what this is you figure out for each part of the project, when you're going to start, when you're going to stop, who needs to be there, how long that's going to take. You'll see there's some parts that are overlapping and some parts that are, this is probably finished materials. So this is an important chart because when you start something, you say, I want to be done on December 31st, you need to figure out how long that's actually going to take and how you're going to, when you're going to have all the trades in. And then this project manager is making sure that you stay on schedule. You do all the documents and reporting, they do the bidding, equipment and material procurement, and that project manager is going to work closely with the site superintendent. So they'll be working hand in hand to make sure this project stays on schedule and that they have everything they need. Next level up would be a construction manager. Oops. And this is more of an executive. It's the higher end of the person overseeing the project. You're going to be the liaison between the owners or investors and the developments to give them project reports. And everybody's going to be working on scheduling, but you're going to be in charge of billing and payment. You'll watch over change orders. So whenever you do drawings for a building, there's usually something that has to get changed during the process, either by a condition they found when they started the construction or a change that the owner or architect wanted to make, and that will affect usually the cost of the project. So you have to do a change order. We're going to change X, Y, and Z, and it's going to cost you this much money. This person is more of a high level, and normally a construction manager in a larger firm would have a bachelor's degree. The thing about construction is you can move up with just work experience. Then you could be an estimator. There are people who just do estimating full time. They do takeoffs from the drawings, and they estimate how much the projects are going to cost. So architects and engineers will hire estimators when they're doing the planning and the design to make sure they're staying within the designated budget. And then contractors will have estimators when they do takeoffs to try to figure out how much is it going to cost them to build this project to make sure that they bid enough money and so they don't end up losing money on the project. So this is a really important person, probably one of the most important people in the whole chain of things, because if their numbers are off, a company could go under easily. You can have a construction document specialist, and so they manage all the construction documents. There's all kinds of legal documents that go along with building the building, and they make sure that everything follows through. And there's pre-laid out documents for each part of the project that you just spent. They make sure that all that paperwork is followed through. So different careers you can have and go into construction. You can have a construction technology degree, which is our 2-year associates. You can have an architecture degree with a 2-year associates, or you can have a 5-year architecture degree. You can have an engineering degree. You can, as I said earlier, you can advance upward, and you can, based on experience, you can improve your place on the job. So on the job training. It's one of the few fields where you still can do that. So careers in engineering technical are different kind of engineers. There's mechanical, electrical, civil, structural. You can become an energy auditor, which is somebody who goes in and looks at an existing building, looks at how much the building is spending on energy, and evaluates ways that they can improve their energy efficiency by performance, more insulation, lighting, a whole bunch of different things. Could even be scheduling too. And then we've already talked about building inspector too. So design engineers, they work on the technical aspects. So these are the structural, mechanical, electrical. This looks just like the same picture for the architects. That's because it is. Those offices aren't going to look that different, maybe just what's up on the walls between an architect and an engineer. And a lot of big firms have engineers on their staff, so they don't outsource it. Some smaller firms will work with a separate structural engineer, separate electrical engineer. A bigger firm may have some of those people right on their own staff. So everything's done in collaborating together. So what does a mechanical engineer do? Mechanical engineer figures out the heating, ventilating, and air conditioning. That one everybody probably figured out. They also figure out the plumbing. They figure out the fire protection and the process piping. Does anybody know what process piping is? Think of manufacturing. This is one where you can save a lot of energy too. I know that my husband has gone into and worked with process piping to save energy. So if you have a whole series of machines, you need either air compression or you need water supply, you might need gas supply to it. It's all the piping that goes to run different machinery. And so that'll run down a continuous line, and so that's called process piping. Electrical engineer figures out the power that's needed for the building. They do the lighting. So that's different than a lighting designer. The lighting designer is going to help you figure out what is the best light fixture, which is the best light output. Electrical engineer can do some of that, but they're not going to be as design oriented. They're going to figure out telecommunications, which is your phone and your internet, although that's becoming more and more wireless. And they also do the fire and security. The fire and security are pretty important. The civil engineer is the one who works on the site, figuring out the site and how the building is going to work on the site. Where are utilities? Where are we getting the water from? Where are we getting the gas, natural gas from? How do we get the sewage? How do we connect to the sewage? So it's all the site utilities. It's the roads. Are we putting new roads in? Are we changing roads? Are we adding parking lots and structures? And they also do the soil testing to make sure that you build the structure on the existing soil that's there, or how they might have to adapt that structure to meet the needs of the soil. So the structural engineer works on the foundations and all of the structural elements. So they work from the foundation all the way up to the roof. They're what holds the building up. Here's an energy auditor. So you can do this on residential, commercial, or industrial buildings. You're looking for energy saving devices. You measure how the building performs, you'll look at utility bills, and then you'll do a financial evaluation of the different investments. So you'll say, okay, I want new windows. Usually don't work well from a financial incentive to put them in, but if people are uncomfortable, a new window might make sense for comfort reasons. But they'll look at what's called the payback. Here's somebody looking at systems in a building. Here they're doing the thermography of the space, and then this is a blower door. So what they do is they pressurize the house. This is usually used for residential, and then they measure where air leakage is happening. So then they go back and seal up those areas. The thing you can be is a home inspector. A home inspector is when there's a real estate transaction, they go and inspect the home and write a detailed report of any issues that are happening there. Most people use this for residential. People also use some form of a home inspector even when they're doing commercial or retail properties. That home inspector at that point might be an engineer, might be an engineer and an architect, but it's somebody to go in who knows the whole workings and to figure out what's not working, what you need help with, so that there's no big surprises when you move in. And it's also used in the negotiation of the sale. So you can say, okay, we offered you X dollars for this house. We found these 5 problems that need money, so we'd like to take that money off. So that becomes part of the negotiating process too. So careers in technical, design engineering, with an engineering degree, it's a BS degree, it's a 4-year, or it's a BS, it's a 2-year master's, and you can get a professional license. In the technical side, you can have an associate's degree in architecture or construction technology and work in these fields, but you can't be licensed with a 2-year degree. You could also have specialized training. There's still some on-the-job training. And in the building trades, if I want to go in the building trades, what can I do? I can be a carpenter, a plumber, HVAC technician, a pipe fitter. You could do all of these with a 2-year associate's degree. You can also do them with a union apprenticeship. Unions are somewhat hard to get into. Usually you have to know somebody. An associate's degree gets you into a small contracting firm, not a union firm, because the union contractors are all required to hire union, so they wouldn't hire you. If you do get into the union, sometimes a degree will help you to advance into placement in the union easier because you have to pass tests for the union certificate. What I will say is that the building trades is aging quickly. Carpenters and plumbing, especially the smaller ones that work in residential, people are aging out of this, and there's a need for younger people in all of these, and in manufacturing for that matter. So with the 2-year associates, you could open your own business if you wanted to. I wouldn't recommend doing it right away. I would work for somebody else. You'll need some capital. You need money to buy that truck and all the tools so you can move along. You'll need some business skills so that you make sure that you make money at this and charge people appropriately. But this is a good way to move along. And this construction technology degree would help you a lot with this because we teach you estimating and planning skills, not just straight carpentry.